Good morning. We will get started this morning. I think, our IT man is coming. Anyway, I've got one. I should have brought it. Okay, good morning. For those of you that didn't hear the first sound, good to see everyone again. Into Mark chapter 11. Remember, we've been following Jesus's last ministry. We're in the last week of Jesus's life before crucifixion. He knew this. He was trying to inform the disciples of this, and they were not doing a very good job of catching on to this. But anyway, Jesus had just been up not too before this, up in the area over in here, Caesarea Philippi, came on back down to the Sea of Galilee, stopped at Capernaum, his hometown, and now he's on his way down. He came over on the east side of the Jordan through Perea, and he's coming into this area. There's Jericho, there's Jerusalem. Those will be the two main cities that we'll be talking about today. So he's on his way, and as he's on his way, he's trying to minister to his disciples and explain to them what Christian life is really all about. So and in verse 28, chapter 10, verse 28, Peter began to say to him, "See, we have left everything and followed you." Life. And so he's talking about all of the possibility, and we have been fortunate in our country not to have a much persecution, but Christians are going to be of the world. Like this, there's no question about it. But then Jesus ended up with this: first will be last, and the last first. What is Jesus? Okay, all right. Right. Mm-hmm. Yes. Crucial, and that is the fact that your mark of being successful or being blessed by God, seeing here that Jesus is putting a different spin on this, and the idea that that is not the motive, or that is not the indicator of, and that of a change.
I really don't know about this, but there are some writers that believe there's a reference here is that in heaven there's equality for all believers. In other words, the rich aren't going to have a better seat in heaven than the poor, or vice versa. And I just throw that out because there's commentators that see that. I don't know if you've seen that or not. But.
Okay. Uh, I I think, and I don't have scriptural basis for this, other than knowing the character of God, that again, that in heaven, a lot of the inequities that we see on earth are going to be taken care of. They're going to be wiped away, and there won't be any inequities there. And I think that, yes, Jesus is pointing out to his disciples again. Now, the disciples themselves, the 12 disciples, what was their financial status? What had been their financial status? Okay, Matthew, tax collector, probably was able to live quite nicely. And they skimmed off the top, maybe even went to the middle, and skimmed from there too. But anyway, he was quite wealthy. James and John, their father ran a fishing industry. And so they probably were fairly well-to-do. Their father had fishing industry, was able to hire fishermen. And so we see that there were 3 of the disciples that probably had fair amount of finances. The rest of them, we don't know much about them, but probably that they were not nearly as wealthy as those other 3. And so we had an inequity in the disciples in this group that Jesus had with him, and that he is pointing out that this inequity is going to be done away with when we get to heaven. Any other comments or questions on this? Okay, then we see that verse 32, and they were on the road going up to Jerusalem. And Jesus was walking ahead of them, and they were amazed, and those who followed were afraid. And taking the 12 again, he began to tell them what was happening to them, saying, "We see we are going to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be delivered over to the chief priests and the scribes, and they will condemn him to death and deliver him over to the Gentiles. And they will mock him and spit on him and flog him and kill him, and after 3 days he will rise." This is Jesus saying this to his disciples now. So it says that they were on the road going up to Jerusalem. Now we just pointed out that they had been coming on down, and now it says that they go up to Jerusalem. When you go to, you're going to go to Mississippi, you're going to go down south, right? All right. When you go to Canada, you're going to go up north. So we see that is not the case with Israel. Everything was going up. Whatever direction you came from, when you went to Jerusalem, you went up. Jerusalem is at about 2,000 higher than 2,000 feet altitude, almost 3,000 feet altitude. And so truly it was up there. The Mount of Olives is pretty good sized, and so you're going up there. But it's not only the physical geography that you're talking about, but it's the importance you're talking about. The importance of Jerusalem and the temple, and going to the temple was something that was very important to them. So now it says, and when they were on the road going up to Jerusalem, Jesus was walking ahead of them. I think that this is a significant statement that Mark has included here. Jesus is walking ahead. What might this mean? Any idea? If you don't want to think of it that way, think of it, why were the disciples lagging behind? You can look at it from either angle. Is there anything significant to this? Or is Mark just giving us direction? Dan.
Well, I think, knowing the story, the disciples were probably lagging behind and talking amongst themselves.
Okay.
That would be one thing, and maybe they weren't as excited to get there as, I know Jesus wasn't maybe excited to get there, but he knew what the mission was.
All right. So that the disciples were talking about what they had been talking about among themselves, and that they really didn't want Jesus in on this conversation. And so they wanted to talk about this. And we see that Jesus, again, and what Dan said, I think, is very important. Jesus knew what was going to happen. I don't know if he knew exactly what day it was going to be, but he knew what was going to happen. And he was not looking forward to this. In the Garden of Gethsemane, he prayed, "Let this cup be taken from me, not my will, but thine be done." And so we know that Jesus was not looking at this with anticipation, but he was looking at this with dread, not only the physical aspect of the crucifixion, but also the aspect of the fact that his Father was going to turn his face on Jesus, and his Father was not going to what's the word that I want here? His Father was not going to be intervening for him in this situation. So I think that Jesus was lonely. at this time, he didn't have any friends. He didn't have anybody that appreciated what he was going through. And again, now, as God, he would not have been lonely, but as man, and we've talked about this many times, that he's fully man, fully God, as man, he would have been lonely at this time. Now, did Jesus have to go to the cross? Physically, did he have to go to the cross? What did he tell the army when the army, what was it, 500 soldiers, the big, strong, brave Roman army, 500 soldiers that came to pick him up, a wandering, straggling individual. What did he tell the army? I could call 10,000 angels, and you would not be able to touch me. And so he, from that standpoint, he didn't have to go through that. But knowing what God had done and the fact that man needed salvation, from that aspect, yes, he needed to do this. So Jesus actually chose death. He chose death, and he showed a lot of courage. Humanly speaking, he showed a lot of courage by going on, even though the disciples were lagging behind and the disciples were not right with him. However, before we knock the disciples too much for this, even though they were lagging, they were still following. They didn't understand exactly what was going to happen, even though Jesus had been trying to explain it to them. And they weren't right next with Jesus, but they were still following, and they were still interested in what Jesus was going to show them. Now again, they were still thinking of Jesus as being a Messiah to overthrow the Romans. This was still part of their thinking. And so this was not going to happen, and I think they're starting to get the idea that, no, this is not what Jesus is going to be doing. And then we go to verse 35. And James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came up to him and said to him, "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you." And he said to them, "What do you want me to do for you?" And they said to him, "Grant us to sit one at your right hand and one at your left in your glory." Jesus said to them, "You do not know what you are asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink, or to be baptized with the baptism with which I am baptized?" And they said to him, "We are able." And Jesus said to them, "The cup that I drink you will drink, and with the baptism with which I am baptized you will be baptized. But to sit at my right hand or at my left is not mine to grant, but it is for those for whom it has been prepared." Now, I think that James and John still thought of themselves as a little bit higher than the rest of the disciples. Remember, their father owned the business. Their father owned the fishing company, and they could come and go as they would like, all right? And so I think they thought of themselves just a little bit higher than the rest of the people that they were hanging around with. And so they thought, you know, we've been running businesses and so on, so we should be the ones that are ruling along with Jesus. We're at the right hand and at the left hand. Now, I think it's Matthew points out that it's not James and John that ask, but that it's James and John's mother that asks. And so we're not going to go into that at this time, other that you, and this is a direct quote from a Jewish lady, "You do not cross a Jewish mother with her sons." And so that might be part of what she was thinking of here. But he was that, that they were asking for this. Now, they had been, James and John had been part of the inner circle. James, John, and Peter had been part of the inner circle. And they were still loyal to Jesus, even if they did not understand him. But we see that Jesus says, you know, are you willing to be baptized with me? Now here, what is the Baptist understanding of the word baptism? We're talking about the Baptist version of it rather than the Lutheran version or some of the Mennonite versions. What does the word baptism mean? It means to be immersed, all right? And the same word is used here as used for immersed. Why would Jesus use that word, immersed, in this connotation? Grant?
I think he might have been asking if they're willing to suffer the death and be buried like he would be.
Okay. Suffer the death and the burial like he would be. Any other comments on this? Yes, Ryan.
It was going to be a full experience, similar to what Christ was going to go through. If you compare the baptism ideas that are out there, immersion is a fully under the water situation versus just sprinkling of what Jesus was going to experience with the disciples. Two was to have a full experience.
Okay, all right. Any other comments on this? Okay, so I think Jesus is saying the depth of what you're going to have to go through is much more than what you understand right now. And so are you prepared to go through this depth? Now, John?
Backing up a little bit, I put a lot of thought into this. Walking to Jerusalem, disciples are behind Jesus. I'm thinking the true answer to that whole thing is love. Jesus' love for his Father and love for human beings, is knowing that we couldn't handle it ourselves, and he would be the only one that could.
Okay,
For salvation. So the true word description of would be his love,
all right.
totally.
So his love for us is one of the reasons why he would have submitted to going to the cross. Yes, and I think that that is very definitely a part of this also, that this was God's will for him, and as God, he had the love for the people that were here on the earth. Any other comments? Okay. Yes.
So I'd like to go back to verse 32, where Jesus is walking ahead of them, and they're amazed, but the guys following are afraid. So is Jesus breaking a trail? Why are they afraid?
Okay, we have a comment in the back.
Jesus has been telling them what's ahead in Jerusalem, and so I think that they're amazed that he's resolute to go there where, where he's going to be executed. So they're amazed, but at the same time, they're fearful about what's ahead. He's not telling them that it's going to be a rosy picture.
Okay. All right, any other comments or questions? Okay, so Jesus knows that the disciples do not understand the depth of what them following him is going to mean for them. And most of the disciples were crucified or killed for their faith in Jesus, for following Jesus. And so they truly were, did have to go through this baptism of going totally through what Jesus went. Then we see in verse 41, and when the 10 heard it, they began to be indignant at James and John. So we had a little bit of falling out among remember, they were people. They were human beings like you and I. And so their reaction was something that was perfectly normal. They began to be indignant at James and John, and Jesus called to him and said to them, "You know that those who are considered rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. But shall not be so among you, but whoever would be great among you must be your servant, and whoever would be first among you must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." What do we call this type of leadership that Jesus is talking about here? It's a term that I heard for the first time about 30 years ago. And what type of leadership is this? Servant. Okay, this is servant leadership. And this is one of the things that Jesus is pointing out to him, that no, they are not going to be sitting with him and saying, you do this and you do that, but they're going to be servant leaders. And a servant leader does what? He serves. And so he serves, and by example will bring others in to be with him, and so that he will follow. This is one of the frustrations that I have with my limited walking ability now, is that I can't do things that I want to do and have other people follow me on that. And so it's frustrating for me to be in that situation. So even when we were fishing, Dan did half of the work for me in the boat, because I couldn't get up and get around. I'd probably fall out of the boat if I tried it. And so anyway, this is the thing that Jesus is talking about here, is that servant leadership. Whoever would be first among you must be slave of all. So he's talking directly to James and John, because they were the ones that had asked to be the co-leaders with Jesus, and to the rest of the disciples who probably thought that they were going to get involved with this also. So we see that Jesus had to pay this price. Now, if you pay a price, what happens to this money? You pay a price for something, what happens to that money? It goes to the owner, or it goes to the individual that did the work. If you hire someone to mow your lawn, then you pay them, okay, so the money goes to them. Okay, so Jesus was paying a price here, and who was he paying this price to? Pardon? Paying the price to us? Okay. Anybody think that we are... You think he was paying it to God? Okay, and you said God also? Okay. I think that this is what we would say, is that he is paying the price to God for ransoming us in this situation. And so that was the price that he was going to have to pay, and he paid that to God. Okay, any other comments or questions before we move into the next section? Okay, verse 46. And they came to Jericho, and as he was leaving Jericho with his disciples and a great crowd, Bartimaeus, a blind beggar, the son of Timaeus, was sitting by the roadside. And when he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to cry out and say, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. Now there's a little bit of controversy. One of the Gospels talks about this as that as he is leaving Jericho, well, here it says he was leaving Jericho, and the other one of the Gospels says he was in Jericho. And so which one of these is correct? Well, one of the explanations for this is that Jericho was actually, there was a main city of Jericho, and then there were kind of like cities around there that were considered part of the Jericho community. And so it's possible that Jesus had left the main city of Jericho, and he was out here in these suburbs, and the suburbs is where the beggar would have been. And so it talks about that he was Bartimaeus. Bartimaeus simply, B-A-R, means son of. And so Bartimaeus was just the son of Timaeus. And it actually tells us this, a blind beggar, the son of Timaeus. It's kind of like the Scandinavian thing of having Petersons and Thompsons and so on. Thompson, the son of Tom, and this type of thing. So Bartimaeus simply meant it was a son of Timaeus, and he was sitting by the roadside. Now we have the road going up from Jericho. You all know that I have hearing aids. And I was at my son's place, and one of his granddaughters was there. And she saw something that scared her or amazed her, and she screeched this absolutely, completely high, piercing sound, and my hearing aids shut off. So I had to wait a few seconds and then mess around with them to get them back on again. So anyway, the road from Jericho, we'll get situated. Jericho is on the west side of the Jordan River to Jerusalem, is about 17 or 18 miles. And so it's a fair trip, about like here to the middle of Rochester. And the road goes up about 3,500 feet from Jericho to Jerusalem. And so this is the road where the Good Samaritan was, where the beggar or the individual had been robbed, and the Good Samaritan came and took care of him and took him to the hospital. This is a road that is still noted for robberies, and it's a pretty rugged road. When we went to Israel, I wanted to travel this road, and the bookman said, no, he said, we don't take that road. And so you can see that his pathway that they have, a paved road. It's a narrow two-lane paved road, but even today yet, there's a lot of robbery and so on that takes place on that. And so most of the tour guides and so on will not take you from Jericho to Jerusalem by this road. But this is the road that Jesus is going on, and we see that he had Bartimaeus was alongside this road. And when he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to cry out and say, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." And many rebuked him, telling him to be silent. But he cried out all the more, "Son of David, have mercy on me." And Jesus stopped and said, "Call him." And they called the blind man, saying to him, "Take heart, get up, he is calling you." And throwing off his cloak, he sprang up and came to Jesus. Okay, now the throwing off his cloak means more than he just got out of his jacket to come and see Jesus. The cloak that they had, this was actually a covering that they had for cold, and this was their pillow and their blanket. When they laid down for rest, they would roll this up. You heard of the cowboys that would sleep with their saddle for a pillow and their jacket rolled up for them. This is kind of the way. The cloak signifies basically everything that he had. And so when he heard Jesus say, "Come to me," he threw off all of this and went running to Jesus. Being blind, he evidently was well enough acquainted with the area so that he was able to get to Jesus, but he went and Jesus said, "What do you want me to do for you?" And the blind man said to him, "Let me recover my sight." And Jesus said to him, "Go your way, your faith has made you well." And immediately he received his sight and followed him on the way. So we see that the blind man had complete faith in Jesus, and he was kind of like when Peter was in the boat and Jesus was walking on the water. Peter jumped out of the boat first and started walking to Jesus, and as long as he was looking to Jesus, he was okay. But when he started looking at his own situation, he started to sink. Okay, this blind man, he wasn't able to look to Jesus because he was blind, but he knew where Jesus was at, and so he rushed to him, forgetting about all of the rest of the stuff that he had. Now, how does this contrast with the disciples? I think we have a good little object lesson in here. Anyone? Yes, Flora. Okay. All right. Okay. All right.
The difference would be like the disciples were comfortable in Jesus' presence, like maybe took him for granted a little bit, and then he was like their friend, but then this blind man was like so aware of his power and his holiness and his ability that he was just like throwing away everything just for fun, just to get closer to him.
Okay.
And see his healing.
All right. Grant?
I think it's interesting, when Jesus said, "Your faith has made you well." I think this is an example of salvation is complete at the time of salvation. Not your sanctification. Your
Okay.
salvation. So that helps support the once for all that we're saved. And the disciples were following Jesus. We don't really have any point like this that clarifies their salvation.
All right.
That they truly have come to full belief in Christ as the blind man did. So I think it was an object lesson, well, it was a life lesson for them. say it until later, some after his crucifixion.
Okay, all right.
I don't know, those are points of argument without real definition, I don't think. in the
Sure,
Word of God.
right.
This would be a true one, salvation is once for all, it's complete.
Okay.
Our sanctification, our salvation.
Eric, right behind you.
Along that same line, the evidence of his faith was how he treated Jesus. So when he was in the presence,
Okay.
the word there, Rabboni, Rabboni is from Aramaic, and it's only used one other time in the whole New Testament.
Okay.
It's a Greek word, but it's derived from Aramaic.
Mhm.
And the only other time Rabboni was used was when Mary saw the resurrected Jesus
Okay.
and recognized him as Jesus. That's what first thing she said.
All right. Okay.
So it carries the meaning of the highest master.
Okay.
It's not just, doesn't mean rabbi, it means like the highest level leader, master that you can have.
Okay. This is the
So
Pope.
by saying you're putting you're setting yourself as the lowest.
Right.
It's the lowest in front of the highest.
Okay. Yeah, see, the disciples, they were following Jesus, but they were still concerned about what they were going to gain from this and what level of comfort they would have. This individual, this blind man, wasn't concerned about this. All he wanted to do was to follow Jesus, and he had complete faith, complete confidence that following Jesus would meet all of his needs. Okay, we'll start with chapter 11. Now, when they drew near to Jerusalem, to Bethphage and Bethany at the Mount of Olives, Jesus sent two of his disciples and said to them, "Go into the village in front of you, and immediately as you enter it, you will find a colt tied on which no one has ever sat. Untie it and bring it. If anyone says to you, 'Why are you doing this?' say, 'The Lord has need of it, and will send it back here immediately.'" And they went away and found a colt tied at a door outside in the street, and they untied it. And some of those standing there said to them, "What are you doing untying the colt?" And they told them that Jesus had said, and they let them go. And they brought the colt to Jesus and threw their cloaks on it, and he sat on it. Okay, we see that they went through the village of Bethany and then Bethphage. What do you know about the village of Bethany? Okay, Jesus stayed a lot there. Where did he stay when he stayed in Bethany, probably? Okay, Mary, Martha, and Lazarus lived there, and that's probably where he stayed. So he went through Bethany, he went to Bethphage. Bethphage is about a mile and a half from Jerusalem. And so he's on his way, and at that point, he tells the disciples to get this colt. Now, I had never thought about this until I was preparing this lesson. I thought about why would this individual just tell these two guys, "Okay, yeah, you can take my colt." He knew them. These were the disciples. Jesus had gone through here many times, and the owner of that colt probably knew Jesus and all of his disciples. And so it was no big deal for him to give this to them. Now, Mary and Martha and Lazarus were good friends of Jesus. How do you become good friends with someone? By spending time with them, by meeting them, having coffee together, various things like this. And so Jesus had probably done this with Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, and he had met some of their friends. during this time. And so they knew who he was. Now, we see that they stayed in the Garden of Gethsemane. Now, I don't know if this is the place, but the Garden of Gethsemane, okay, you can see the Garden of Gethsemane is where those wiggles are, and that black dot, that's where the Garden of Gethsemane is today. And there's a cave there. And we don't know if this is the cave that Jesus stayed in, but it's very possible that this could be the exact cave that Jesus and his disciples, okay, there are 13 people. Houses were not very big at that time. If 13 people showed up at Mary and Martha and Lazarus' house, where would they put them? They probably didn't have room for them, and so Jesus and his disciples would stay in these olive groves, and we see there's one of the trees, and this tree in this olive grove could go all the way back to Jesus' time. It is that old. But it's very possible that Jesus and his disciples could have stayed in this, and they would have stayed there regularly when they came. When Judas directed the army to Jesus, he knew exactly where to send him. He knew where Jesus was going to be going for night. He was going to be going to this area, the Garden of Gethsemane, possibly staying in those caves. This is one of the things that I really got excited about this week as I was studying this. All of this is history. This is geography. You can tie in all of these things in the Bible with things that are actually there in Israel, in Jerusalem at this time. And if you haven't been there, and if you have the opportunity, if they ever quit throwing bombs across there, take the opportunity to go and see the things there, because this is history, and it there will now point out all of the things that we have in the scripture. My son we were talking about this last night, and my son was talking about it, that he had seen something that at Shiloh, which is where they think that the ark was stationed while they were building the temple and until the temple had been built. Shiloh is outside of Jerusalem some ways there, and they are doing some excavating, and they are finding foundation stones. They are finding foundations now of where some of these buildings that we hear about and see in the scriptures would have been placed. And it's not like the Book of Mormon or the Quran, which is made up of somebody's dreams, ideas, and so on. This is actual history. This is actual geography, and we can depend on that. Let's bow for a word of prayer as we close. Dear Heavenly Father, we come to you thanking you once again for being with us throughout this day. And we pray, Lord, that you would guide and direct the service to follow with Pastor Tim. We ask these things now in your precious name.